This is our £500 Ford Focus, and it has taken me to all corners of the country. You may have seen it on various adventures we've done. It served me well and I've slept in it, and this is a video on how I revamped it into a better camper for our coastal road trip we did last year. So it's been about a year since the Focus was on the road on the SC500 video, and it needs a couple of bits doing to it. It needs some welding done underneath, it needs a new alternator. I also need to look at the interior. So the first version of the micro camper was decent, but limiting in what I could do in there. It was just a bed and like some drawers essentially. So I need to get all of that out and then get a new structure in for the next version, which will hopefully be a better camper. The first step was to remove all the old framework that I bolted into the car for the previous trip around the North Coast 500. I wanted to reuse as much of the material as possible, but I will have to put a new sheet of plywood in to use as the base frame, as that will save me about 70mm or so in height when I'm actually in the car. Space is key for this one. I do love that this frame could be taken out and put into any other Mark I Focus. Maybe we should start selling some Mark I Focus camper conversion blueprints or something. Bit of a clean up next, lots and lots of vacuuming as I got pine needles and branches and other matter up from the car. Before I got the new frame, I wanted to get a new front seat, so I found a second-hand one online. The plan was to turn this into the toilet, but I didn't want to ruin the original leather seat that came with the Millennium Edition Focus. I could then double check the measurements with the seat back in and lay the old frame onto the new sheet of ply to use as a stencil for the new frame. I took a few more panels and bits out of the car and then put the plywood base in. And while I was doing that, Tyler and Matt worked on changing the front springs, putting a new alternator in, and then also a bit of welding done. Next day I put on some roof bars that I'd ordered off eBay, which would be the base for the roof shelf / roof seat. I wasn't sure at this point how it was going to look, if this would be for storage of luggage or if this would be more functional. Weirdly, my neighbour was getting rid of some old kitchen flooring a couple of weeks before, which was going to end up in the bin, so I repurposed it to make the custom rack. It was then time for the main construction in the car, so I started with the toilet, obviously. I got the new seat from the other Mark I and took the base off it and screwed on a plywood base. I then trimmed the size of this eco toilet down and just crudely zip tied it to the base of the seat. Everything in this build is pretty ugly. I didn't have loads of time on this project. I would have liked to have made it look a bit neater, and I had to cut a lot of corners from a time point of view. I could now focus on the main frame inside, which would include a cupboard, a bed and a shelf at the back for a kitchen area. I used various pieces of wood I had lying around in the garage, and I cut these all up and put them into place. With the frame in, I could now make sense of how the kitchen area would work. I cut 2 pieces of plywood to make a main shelf that would, in a sense, replace the parcel shelf. I then attached a second piece of it with some hinges and then ran some rope through this up into the boot, so when you would open the boot it would pull this flap up essentially. This meant it could take some of the space out of the car, but it would actually function as the main feature of the build. I then went down to the Mid Sussex Wood Recycling Centre, which is my local place for getting cheap recycled timber. And by some luck, I found a packet of cladding they just had lying around. I was just looking for some really thin pine or something just to put around the cupboard and then paint it. But this even had primer on it and the effect I was going for. So I just cut all this down and pinned it to the frame that would make the main cupboard and the sides of the bed. It was then a case of finishing it off with some paint, cupboard doors, curtains, lights, holster run cables through, putting in final bits of furniture and decoration. And then I finally decided that I wanted a chair to go on the roof rack in the end. So I put that up using more kitchen flooring, and that was kind of it. This is how it turned out. I would have liked more time on it, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. All in all, a cheap and cheerful camper in a Mark I Ford Focus. The cost of the build was around £170, and this included the roof bars, which were a lot of that, the plywood base, which was another large portion, hinges and brackets, and then kitting it out with everything came to about £250, so just over £400 in total. I used loads of timber and screws from the previous build, so I was happy with how much of it was recycled. The trip was a lot of fun. You can go and watch that on the main Car Throttle channel, although if we were to do this again, I might make some adjustments to the beds. But I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks. So that's a little insight of how I turned this car into a proper micro camper. You can click here to subscribe. You can watch more videos here. See you later.